Hi, it's Michelle Savage from XBRL US. Thank you all for joining us today for the webinar, FASB Requirements for Extensible Enumerations. We're going to be talking about some changes in the 2021 taxonomy that many XBRL tool and service providers will need to incorporate into their applications. Before we get started, I wanted to mention that XBRL International just published some proposed guidance for extensible enumerations. So for those of you on the call who are members of XBRL US or XBRL International, you're encouraged to go and review that guidance and weigh in on the standards being established. So to start the program today, I want to introduce our speakers. We're going to have two speakers from the Financial Accounting Standards Board. We have David Shaw. David is XBRL Supervising Project Manager at the FASB. We also have Louis Mathern, who's Chief of Taxonomy Development. Louis is here primarily to help respond to questions that we may receive, in addition to David, of course. And then we also have Campbell Pry, President and CEO of XBRL US. We're going to start off with a presentation from David, kind of walking through the changes in requirements. We'll then take a couple of CPE questions for those of you who are getting CPE in the course today. Then Campbell is going to talk a little bit about how extensible enumerations are used and the value that they provide in taxonomies and in ensuring a consistency of data that's reported. Then finally, we'll do a couple of CPE questions, again, just to close up and then talk about some upcoming events. As we go through the program today, if you do have questions, please click on the Q&A link that you see on the bottom of your screen, and then you can send your questions in. And also, as I mentioned, we will be doing the CPE questions at 2 points during the session today. So if you are getting CPE, make sure that you respond to those so you can get your CPE certificate. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to David, who's going to walk us through the presentation. David?
Thank you very much, Michelle. And I would like to thank all of you for joining us this afternoon. We do know that these have been difficult times that we've all been dealing with. And so we thank you for being able to take some time out of your day to join us this afternoon. So first off, the disclaimer. The views expressed in this presentation are those of the presenters. Official positions of the FASB are reached only after extensive due process and deliberations. Now, just briefly, here's the agenda of what specifically Louis and I will be covering. Michelle did point out that Campbell has his own presentation materials as well. But so within this agenda, first of all, I'm going to provide a high-level summary. And then we are going to talk about the data types registry. And then after that, we are going to have a pretty lengthy discussion on the Extensible Enumerations 2.0 implementation. So here's the summary. This is just a high-level overview of what we're going to be covering. We do have significant technical changes planned for the 2021 US GAAP and SRT taxonomies. So that's basically a year from now. And so we know that this is going to be more challenging than a typical roll from one taxonomy to the next. You can say that, or the way to think about this is we probably haven't had this significant of a technical change to our taxonomy since we introduced the type dimension with, I believe, the 2017 taxonomy. But I foresee that this is probably going to be bigger than that. So we are planning to implement the DTR and the EE 2.0 with the 2021 taxonomy. Today is going to be a very technical discussion, and it is largely aimed at the software providers, and even within the software providers, the development people, the one with more of a technical background, and not accounting technical, but technology technical. And so these changes are very impactful on the software. And if the instance documents are not syntactically valid, it could break the instance documents when they try to be submitted to the SEC. And so that's the reason we're having this discussion today. We want the software developers of the service providers to be ready. And so we will be available to answer questions throughout this process, but we want to make sure everyone knows what's coming. And that's why we're having this conversation today. First up, the DTR. We're starting with this, even though the headline is really the extensible enumerations. The DTR is an integral part of implementing extensible enumerations, and it's a change that is important to have for the taxonomy, even regardless of EE 2.0 implementation. And so what it is it's not only a registry, it's a process that was put in place by XBRL International to identify new data types to be codified and have broad applicability across a number of different projects. And so this DTR, it adds a number of new data types that have been requested by jurisdictions. And so within this process, XII has codified the numeric and non-numeric schemas into this new single DTR schema. So this will cause a change of location and namespace for a number of data types that are used not only in the US GAAP and SRT taxonomies, but in taxonomies used all throughout the world. And so domain item type, which is currently in the non-num schema, it will be available in the DTR. And so that will be a change for the 2021 taxonomy. The second bullet point adds data types for certain GAAP defined data types. And this is a concern where we have with the service providers implementing this is if there's hard-coded information, this is where they might trip up on things within their software. And so the DTR added two data types that were previously defined in the US GAAP taxonomy. Those are the G-year list and the flow item type. And so what's going to happen for the 2021 taxonomy is that those two data types are going to be removed from the US type schema, and then they're going to be changed in all the elements that have that data type. Those are going to be changed to then use the DTR defined data types of G-year list and flow item type. Also, very important to the DTR is that it added a new data type called no-lang token item type, which is the base type for EE 2.0, making it necessary for implementation that we implement the DTR. So on this slide, I have provided you the location of where the registry can be found and where the schema can be found. And the slides will be posted after this presentation. So if you want to download it and have that information available, it will be to you. And so this is the part I want to stress really hard to the service providers is that this can have an impact to your software. If you have information hard-coded, it may break when you roll over to the 2021 taxonomy. And as we have our publishing platform that we use to publish our taxonomy, we run into issues of items hard-coded all the time that we have to address. And so we know what that can be like, and that's why we're having this discussion. Also, it does add a lot of new elements to it, and extension elements can leverage those data types included in the DTR, and so it's something that should be given consideration. Let me stress again, this is very important for the technical and developer staff of the service providers. Okay, so enumerations 2.0 or EE 2.0, the extensible list elements. We introduced those with the 2017 US GAAP taxonomy. It was a custom US GAAP taxonomy data type, so it was defined in the US type schema, and it was designed to imitate the regular expression pattern that was initially being proposed by the specifications working group in the EE 2.0 working document. And it allowed for multiple values to be reported in effect. And this is why we were going for EE 2.0 and why we didn't implement enumerations 1.0, because that only allowed for a single value to be reported. And we had seen data that suggested that that multiple values would need to be reported in certain cases. And so that's why we that's why we went this path, where we went with our custom US type, and we waited for EE 2.0 to reach recommendation status. We are going to spend a lot of time going over all of the other validation aspects provided for in the XII defined data type later in these slides, but none of that was included with our custom type. It was just basically a fancy regular expression pattern. And so I have at the bottom of the slide, we are intending to convert to the EE 2.0 defined data type since we have recommendation status, and that was reached on February 12th of 2020. And just like we provided for on the DTR, here is the location of the specification, the schema, and the requirements document. And so what this means is for the 2021 US GAAP and SRT taxonomies, we are going to change the data type from the custom type, which is now defined in the SRT taxonomy, the SRT types schema file. That's going to be removed. We're not going to be using that custom type anymore. All elements, old and new, will be created with the EE 2.0 defined data type, which is enumeration set item type. And with that, it will introduce two new attributes to the taxonomy. The first one is the link role and the domain. And we'll go over that in the next two slides that follow. I'm going to quickly interrupt. There's a question. It says, is there a plan to remove US types and or SRT type schema? The answer to that question is no. We're not going to remove those schemas because there are still a number of custom types that are needed. Throughout the taxonomy, we have a number of fixed lists, and those are US GAAP, largely US GAAP defined. The only two data types that were codified from the US GAAP type schema were the flow item type and the G-year list item type. Everything else will remain. So on this slide, I have included one of the TINs that we had included with the extensible list element for the defined benefit and defined contribution tax status. And so the top has the note, which is just had a standard note that applied to all of the extensible list elements. And then we had two additional parts included in this reference. One was the extensible list domain, and the other was the extensible list link role location, which is shown in that red box at the bottom. And so that domain and its members were included in the domain member relationships in the definition link base at that URI that's listed at the bottom of the image. And so that will continue for the 2021 taxonomy. We're going to publish out that definition link base, but we're not going to include this information in the TIN because it will now be a part of the schema. And so I can show that more better on the following slide. So I've taken this element, defined contribution plan, tax status, extensible list, and I've shown how it will appear next year with the 2021 taxonomy. the first box is the the angle bracket XML view, and then I have a friendlier view at the bottom from one of the tools to show how it's going to look. And so, as I said, those two parts that were included in the 10 are now going to be part of the schema that I have highlighted in yellow. It's going to point to the link role, and the domain member relationship for that link role will be included in that link base that I showed on the previous slide. And then it lists out what the domain is. And right here we have the retirement plan tax status domain. And so that will be included within that link base. The domain member relationships will be included there. Okay, so this is the big important takeaways, one of the big important takeaway slides of today. The validation, because there's, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of validation included with this data type. And so we want to walk through this very explicitly so everyone knows what's going on. So the first three, which I consider more the primary and I think more the difficult ones to actually get correct in this process, are listed at the top. And we're going to go through those individually in the slides that follow to make sure that everyone's on the same page and knows what to expect. So the first is the proper format of the value. The next is element reported as a fact must exist in a schema. And third, the element must be present in the domain member relationships defined in the US GAAP and SRT taxonomies. And so that's where this gets important, and why we published out those domain member relationships in that link base is because those are now going to be leveraged going forward. And then there's additional validation, which has to be a space separated list of values. So you can have multiple values reported there. You don't split them up by a comma, a semicolon, anything like that. It's just a space separated list. The listed facts must be unique. So you cannot list an entry twice, and they have to be lexicographically ordered, which means alphabetically, a fancier way of saying alphabetically. Okay, so now we're going to go over each of the top three validation points. So I talked about earlier that when we created the data type, it was based on the regular expression pattern that the specification working group was looking at the time. And so what ended up getting into the final recommendation status requirement was different. Pardon me. It's a URI based notation and not the regular expression pattern that we provided in our custom type. So I have an example to walk you through and show you what that means. So here's an example provided by a filer. I've cut out the information and just shown the regular, or just the pertinent information. And so they're disclosing that they have a 401k plan. And we have an example in our taxonomy implementation guide on retirement benefits on how this is to be tagged. And the filer followed that guide, and they provided the two facts as shown at the bottom. And so it's the 401k is a US based plan. That's the sponsor location. And so they've tagged that with the country : US. And then it's also a qualified plan. And so that's the tax status, is it's qualified, and they've provided that fact as well with the US GAAP : qualified plan member. So that's how it's currently tagged today, and how you would expect it with that regular expression that we have provided for in the taxonomy. And so with the URI based notation, that changes. And so it's the same disclosure, same two facts, and I'm using the 2020 taxonomy for now. And so that's the value shown at the bottom, that it now switches to that URI based notation. So it's got the SEC country, and and then the 2020-01. I forgot the S in the HTTPS, but that would be included there for that fact of US. And then the next fact for the tax status, the qualified member would have the FASB URI, followed by the hash sign and then qualified plan member. So now I have this slide for you, which just pulls it together so you can see what that difference is going to look like going forward for the 2021 taxonomy. Okay, so the next item required, the primary requirements to get it, is the element reported as a fact, it must exist in a schema. And so for any of the elements that are defined in the US GAAP taxonomy, the SRT taxonomy, or any of the taxonomies that the SEC maintains, like country, currency, DEI, all of those, that's not an issue because those are defined in a taxonomy. Where it becomes an issue is when the filer is naming an extension element. That element has to be defined in their extension taxonomy. And so I have an example here. I'm not picking on this filer, but it's a real example. And they've reported this this fact of development and service member, which is perfectly fine. Okay, I don't want that to be thought that that's wrong. It's an extensible list. It allows for the list of values to be augmented. That's all great, but because it was just a regular expression pattern and not the validation, this element now has to be created as an extension element in the filer's extension taxonomy. Okay, the third requirement is the element must be present in the domain member relationships that are defined in the US GAAP and SRT taxonomies, which I talked about earlier when we talked about the schema, how the schema changes in the introduction of the new attributes on these elements. And so in order to help everyone out in this process, the last couple iterations of the US GAAP taxonomy, we've had these link-based references that pull in the domain member relationships for the extensible list elements. So that should be the easy part for the service providers to have to deal with. It's because we've already made it available right here in the base schema. And this is the 2020 taxonomy, since the 2021 taxonomy doesn't yet exist. But that is the plan, is that we will include these link-based references when we publish out those taxonomies, the US GAAP and SRT. And so going back to the first example I showed with the 401k plan, you had the sponsor location and you had the retirement plan tax status. Those were the two facts reported. And so this is not easiest to show, but I did what I could. And so here is what the where those domain member relationships are. I've just done a highlight to show at the bottom, we have the retirement plan sponsor location domain, and it has the two members, the domestic plan and the foreign plan. And so US isn't present. And that has to be added as a child to the domain plan member. But the qualified plan member, that one already exists in this domain member relationship. So nothing has to be adjusted for that. And if anyone on the call is wondering, well, why didn't we just include the US as a child to domestic plan? Because we can't, because for not every registrant, US is not domestic. It could be foreign, and they could have a different domestic. And so we needed to build that flexibility in. And so that's why none of the country members are located here. That should be defined by the registrants. Okay, so this is really techie, I know. This is for my example, I created just a very simple definition link base. This would be the registrant's extension definition link base. It would obviously have more information, but I've just simplified this just to focus on adding that US member to the list of values for the sponsor location. And so I've got 3 highlights in yellow. The first one is the ELR. There you have the extensible enumeration list. And so that's what's included in the attribute for this, will be included for the attribute for this element. It's going to point to that ELR. And then you can see the registrant has created a locator for the US member coming from the country taxonomy. And then below that, there's the ARC for the domain member relationship from that domestic plan member to the US member. So this is what is the sort of capability the service providers are going to have to be able to build within their tool set, the ability to augment this list of values. It's not a pretty image, but I'm not really sure of a better way to show it, unfortunately. And so here's my attempt at showing it prettier. So now that US member is listed as a child to the domestic plan member. And then I've taken one of the tools, and this is leveraging the EE 1.0. And so that's why you have the that regular expression pattern shown there and not the URI notation. And so in order to select that value of US, you picking from the drop down and selecting US. I know that I've built this based on the tool sets that I'm familiar with. I understand that that's not going to be the case for all the service providers out there, and it's probably going to look different within their products. But trying to at least create a visual as far as what you should expect or what you should anticipate seeing. Okay, so now I want to kind of tie all of that together with an example. And so so this example has multiple values. So we're going to go over some of the other validation issues I mentioned. But so this example starts out, it says, in addition, the company maintained defined benefit pension plans for employees in the Netherlands, Poland, France, and Norway. And then they have the DC plan, which I'm going to skip over, and then we're going to go to the pink highlight. And it says they have defined contribution post-retirement plans in Italy, Belgium, China, Korea, Japan, Singapore, Thailand, and Taiwan, which is quite the list. And that's why I like this example, because it shows what we were really trying to leverage in using the EE 2.0 standard to be able to have that space separated list of values that you don't get with EE 1.0. So keeping the highlighting stays the same throughout. So so just follow the highlights on it. On this slide, I have the list of all the country members that are named in the disclosure. As you can see, I have United States at the top as a child to the domestic plan member. And that is simply because the disclosure starts out with in addition. They disclose additional, there's more to this disclosure, obviously, than this paragraph. And in that disclosure information, they define US as their domestic plan. And so this is all information about their foreign plans. And I've listed out all of the countries that they have in the disclosure, and they're listed out in the order in which they're disclosed, which it doesn't really have to follow that. It could really more or less follow any pattern, so long as it's, so long as it's sense. These are all the foreign plans. You could have more of a parent-child relationship if it made sense. You could build that out. But what's important is all of these members have to be added to that set of domain member relationships that we have defined in that in the link base. And so the yellow ones correspond with the first plan that was disclosed, and the pink highlighting corresponds with the second list of countries where there's sponsor location. And so now on this slide, I have just a simple example of what that multiple value is gonna look like. Pulling together all of all of the items we talked about today. So they're all defined in a schema. All of them are coming from the country taxonomy, and here I managed to get the HTTPS right. They're defined in the domain member relationship. They're following the right path, the right format, that URI notation. So we've got all of that listed. And so then there were the three other requirements that I said. They have to be lexicographically ordered, which means alphabetically. So even though they had set them in a different order in the disclosure, here they have to be alphabetic. So France comes first, the Netherlands, Norway, and then Poland. And then you get the same on the bottom. I don't know if I think I got them in correct alphabetic order. Someone might want to check me. And so the other item is that they have to be unique. They have to represent a unique value. And so not to say that a fact couldn't, you can't have Belgium twice, so, or any other value twice. I just want to make sure this is clear. So just a simple example. Let's say that Campbell and I both took trips to Europe, and I flew to France, and then I went to Germany, and then I went to Belgium, and then I went back to France, and then I went home. You can't list out France twice as the start and end, nor can you list the order in which the countries I attended. I can only tell you that I went to Belgium, Germany, and France in that order, because that's the lexicographical ordering. And so Campbell, on his trip to Europe, he went to Norway, and then he went to Italy, and then he went to Germany. So we both went to Germany. That's not what the repeating means. It just means that, or that the uniqueness means, excuse me, is that we can both have that fact. It's just you can't have it listed twice. But his would have to be lexicographically ordered too. So his would be ordered first Germany, and then Norway, and then Italy. I'm sorry, no, first Germany, and then Italy, and then Norway. Apologies for that. Okay, I have spent quite a bit of time going over the data, and a lot of the values have been pretty clean and will be easy to convert over. Just getting that URI notation, it should come over clean, and they represent items that are already defined in the domain member relationships that we have set up for the US GAAP taxonomy. So that'll be clean. And there's a number of issues that I see where they're going to get syntactically cleaned up. A simple example is the value is not providing the correct GAAP prefix. Instead of saying US GAAP, they just have GAAP or something like that. That's going to get fixed in the URI notation. But there is one item that I did want to point out to people. We did see this in a number of cases, and so this is why we wanted to bring this up. But this is a real life example where the concept that they're using, the base element, is other real estate owned measurement and input extensible list. And then right below with that blue highlight, that's the value that they've provided. And what they're providing is actually a different extensible list element. And it's other real estate owned valuation technique extensible list. This could syntactically be done under the new with the new data type, but it would have to be augmented to the list of accepted values, but it would syntactically be valid. And so that's why I did want to point that out. And some of the other issues we saw in some of the values, I think we're going to be raising with the XBRL US Data Quality Committee to see about adding some additional validation rules to try and address some of those. And so that'll be developed over time as we work through this process. We do know that this is going to be a difficult, not difficult, but this is going to be a harder process than changes we've seen to previous versions of the taxonomy. And that's, what I can't stress enough on April 13th of 2020 is that you've got a little less than a year to get this implemented within your software. And I know that there's a number of resources out there that can help you with that. And we are available to answer questions, just like we're having today. And we will be providing additional materials to try and help out where we can to make this go as seamlessly as possible. And so with that, I think I'm about at the end of my materials. I don't think any other questions have come up that I should be addressing at this time. So I thank all of you for your time. If anything does come up with a question, go ahead and input it and we'll try and address it. Outside that, I'm going to turn it back over to Michelle so that she can do the CPE questions. Michelle?
Thanks very much. And yeah, thanks for that great and very, very thoughtful presentation. A lot of information, but I think it was very clearly presented. We're going to go into some CPE questions now. And as David said, as we go through these CPE questions and then through Campbell's presentation, if you have additional questions, please just send them through the Q&A chat, and we'll get them answered. Okay, so first we're going to launch our first poll for those getting CPE, and hopefully you can see this here. First question is, which of the following XBRL technical specifications will be implemented for the first time in the 2021 US GAAP financial reporting taxonomy? Is it 1, dimensions? Is it 2, EE 2.0 and DTR? Or is it 3, XBRL 2.0? So I'm going to give you another 30 seconds or so to respond to that, and then we'll go to our next question. Okay, just about another 15 seconds here. Okay, it looks like we did get another question coming in, and what we've been doing is Lewis and David have been responding to some of these questions individually, and but if they see a question that they think would be helpful for everyone to hear, we'll announce those. Okay, so I'm going to end the polling for this first question. And we're going to go on to poll number 2. Okay, so here's the question. What may happen if Extensible Enumerations 2.0 and DTR are not properly implemented in software applications? The first possible response is it will cause XBRL reports to fail with the 2021 taxonomy update. Or 2, it will cause XBRL reports to be rejected by the SEC Edgar system. Or 3, it will cause XBRL reports that use taxonomy releases prior to 2021 to fail. Okay, so just click on the button that represents what you think is the most accurate response. And we've got like another 15 seconds or so. Okay, we're going to wrap up this poll question in just a second here. And now I'm going to turn it over to Campbell, and Campbell's going to walk us through some examples of how to use this. So Campbell?
Michelle, before we do that, do you mind if I address the question that came through real quick?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so the question is, for the benefit of everyone, will there be any restrictions on the length of the value in the extensible list? For example, in the example, foreign plans member, each France Norway is 40 characters, 40 plus characters long? The answer to that is no, there is no restriction on the length of the values. Okay, and all right, go ahead, Campbell. Apologies for that.
No, it's fine. So hopefully don't make them too long. We want to see them in a spreadsheet. All right, so I was just going to go through today, just go through the data that's being reported to date for some of these extensible lists. And we looked at some data, particularly for the revenue recognition. And one of the requirements for that was to, if you had multiple products and you separated those, you would dimensionalize those values. However, there are some extensible list elements added for those. So if you, and the way these are supposed to be used is that if you have a revenue, but you only have one product that you want to report, rather than creating a dimension and dimensionalizing that revenue, then you would just basically use the extensible list. And what that's really saying is our revenue is comprised of this, revenue from this product. So we had a look at the data. Now it became, on the revenue side at least, we don't have that much use of the extensible lists yet. There's probably there's probably less than 100, I think for the extensible list for revenue recognition, it's been used like 20 times. And this is for the 2020 and for reports for the year ended for 2019. And then there was another extensible list, one that David showed, which was the type of revenue extensible list item. And so that was used a little bit more, about 78 times. Just so you know where these are in the taxonomy, I'll just bring these up. It's just so everyone can see where they are. So this is the US GAAP taxonomy, and we've got elements here. You can see revenue from contract with customer, including assessed tax, and underneath that is the extensible list item. This extensible list item appears in multiple locations. It's I click on the right place. It appears here in the income statement, and it's in for partnership income and revenue from contract. So this element is also associated with, if we go down to including assessed tax, you can see here the element, this extensible list is, I've got something in my way on my screen here. It's basically saying I've got revenue. I can provide the extensible list element to tell how that revenue is allocated. And in this link here, you can see it is also the same extensible list item is also associated with the element revenue from contract with customer, excluding assessed tax. So if you've used either of these elements, you can use this extensible list element. So one of the things we did was we said, okay, well, let's go and pull all the revenue from contract with customers, excluding assessed tax and including assessed tax, and look at where they've broken it down. So, and this is how we can use the data. So one of the things I've done here is, so I've got the companies, there's about 3,000 revenue items here. And some companies will use the revenue contract excluding, some companies use the including, depending on what their reporting is. And what I've done is I pulled the extensible enumeration elements here for the first item, which we were looking at, which is revenue from contract with customer, product and service extensible list. But I also pulled revenue from product and services extensible list. This extensible list element is really if you're reporting revenue as a total. So this would include non-606 revenue as well, just to kind of get a little bit more data, since we don't really have that much to date for the extensible list elements. And what you can see is, I also said, well, if they've dimensionalized this data, so this data here is without dimensions, and then I looked at this element had been dimensionalized as well and what dimensions they used on it for the product and service axes. And so this will tell you, this is basically a list of what that company's products and services are. So they've got healthcare. This company is obviously a healthcare company, One Life Healthcare Company, of course. And what you'll see is, in some of these, if they don't dimensionalize it, where the extensible list is used, it basically gives you more information about this value that was being reported. So we know the revenues, obviously, for this 339 for Acadia Pharmaceutical is for all products. In theory, it shouldn't be services. So if we scroll down here, we'll see in a number of cases, companies have broken down the extensible list. In some cases, we've also seen here that they've provided two. Now, this is using these extensible lists at the moment are just using fact values. There's no validations on these at this point, but you can kind of get an idea of what people are starting to use it for. This kind of seems a little bit nonsensical using it in this case because they've kind of given the extensible list breakdown, but then they've also given the dimensional breakdown of it. And so they kind of contradict with each other. So one of the things that you want to be careful about is when you use these extensible lists. And the idea is I'm reporting the total, but I don't want to have to provide a dimensionalize that data because I've only got one value. So in theory, if you look down these items on the right with all the dimensions, if they've just got one, like this one here, they could have this is a dimension and they would have dimensionalized this fact. Rather than creating the dimensionalized fact, they could have just used the extensible list. So that saves creating additional facts, creating additional members for it, putting those on the, and putting that data into the XBRL instance. So, and just to give a fact summary on this, you can see here, we've got approximately, I think there's about 20 elements used. Most of these are just using the generic US GAAP technology services member, for example, here. So they've picked up these products that are basically defined in the US GAAP taxonomy. And typically you wouldn't then need to use these dimensions, which they haven't in this case. As David mentioned, under IE2, this would obviously change. It wouldn't be US GAAP anymore. It would be the URI would be used as well. But that's just to give you a flavor for how much these are being used. So the use of the extensible list at this point is pretty light. But you may want to encourage, if you're a filing agent, encourage your filers to use these rather than going and creating additional facts for the breakdown. Obviously, if you've got more than one dimension member, then obviously the extensible list is not going to be an appropriate way to go. But if you've got one, such as the case here that we see on this line here on 415, then you probably say, well, maybe we should have used the extensible list element. And what would have happened in this case for this company, they would have reported an amount of 28,429 for the total, plus then they would have also reported the 28,429 with this dimensional member on it. So it's kind of duplicative. If anyone's interested, I can make this list available, but this basically just gives you a summary of where the dimensions are being used, where the extensible lists are being used for the revenue recognition elements. So if anyone has any questions on that, I'm more than happy to talk about them. But I thought this might be useful just to give you a flavor for where the data is and how it can be used.
Campbell, thank you very much.
I think we had some questions come in.
Yeah, we do have some questions come in. Lewis and David, do you want to run through these? Do you want me to pose the questions, or do you want to take a look at them and just respond directly, or?
I feel kind of it's more, I'd like to hear Campbell's thoughts on the questions that have come in. I think it's more his area in the usage of the data. So I'd like to hear his thoughts. Campbell?
All right, so the first question we had is, how does the consumer of the data know that the revenue fact elements are both associated with the EEL? Is there anything other than the standard presentation link-based parent-child relationship? So it's a good question. So what I did in this case, I've assumed that they should, that's what would go with each other. And it's just to give you an idea of what the question means. And that's why I kind of raised the issue here. So this revenue from contract with customer product and services, because it's in the presentation link base, I'm assuming that this is basically being associated with the breakdown of this element. Now, maybe that's some consideration for the FASB to consider, saying, linking this extensible list element directly with an element in the US GAAP taxonomy. That might be useful, or those elements that it applies to. And as you can see here, from this element, the element here is also in this section. It kind of implies it's associated with the contract from customer excluding assessed tax. So and does that apply to excise and sales taxes or revenue from contract customer? There's not an implicit relationship there. We're kind of assuming that that's from using the data. We're assuming that's the case. I'm not sure that's a correct assumption, but that's probably a good point to provide guidance on and just make it clear that what elements, extensible list elements, are associated with. You have any views on that, David?
The only thing I would add is they have references on them too, and so they do tie back to. They should, tie back to a GAAP requirement. And so, to the extent that you are, meeting the disclosure requirements of the, you're meeting those disclosure requirements, there should be a reference that goes back to tie all that information together. So like with the examples I walked through on the defined benefit plans and the defined contribution plans, filers make a number of disclosures about that. And so you run into this kind of network of, well, does it really relate? It in effect relates to all of the facts that are disclosed about the DC or the defined benefit or defined contribution plans. So it could be kind of thought of that way as far as pulling all that information together. And there should be some sort of common member in the context that holds all those facts together. It's kind of like the idea of a container to hold all that information, if it applies. So for my example, I only really focused on the actual facts reported with the extensible list elements, I cut it off, but there were a number of disclosures as far as the expense and contributions and that sort of thing that would all have that same member to hold all that set of facts together.
Thank you, David. We had a couple of additional questions from the same individual. I'm not sure if you feel you've addressed those or if we should cover those.
Not really. I haven't really tried the second one. Conversely, is it guaranteed this is an ELL in the presentation link base and all of its parent-child ancestors are modified? So yeah, I don't think that would be the case. And I think back to David's point is latching back to the references. At the moment, there's no explicit way that it says that. But for example, on this extensible link item here, this is clearly applicable to 606 revenues. But if you've got other revenues which exclude 606, I wouldn't go to the extent of necessarily assuming that applies to that same revenue. And when I did the spreadsheet, I kind of ran into that problem. So I've got this is the extensible enumeration for all revenues. So this product, so let's just find one where there's multiple. So this is right, US GAAP healthcare patient service member. This is for all types of revenue. Technically, I would say that this would apply to, the revenue items, but then does it apply to does it apply to the 606 revenue? Yeah, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. It's kind of a little bit, I think what you'd have to do in this case is the only assumption you can make is, oh, this member here is applying to all the revenue. And so then what I would expect is that any of this other revenue underneath this revenue, which is associated with the 606 revenue, would also be would be rolling up into this. So you would expect, depending on where those extensible lists are, there is a hierarchical relationship between them. You wouldn't expect, oh, I've got an extensible list, this represents all my revenue for the company. You wouldn't expect those members to contradict with those extensible list items that are maybe on a child element. However, just looking at the data, that's clearly not the case today. So that's obviously something that would need further guidance and would need to be cleaned up.
Okay, thank you. And then we have another question. When the filer presented the list of countries, it likely had them in order of magnitude. With this form of tagging in alphabetical order, is that information being lost?
Well, I mean, to the extent you can say that definitively that they are in order of magnitude, but it's because it's just going to provide them in a lexicographically ordered list. And that's just a restriction on the data type.
Okay, so that's just a requirement and okay.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't expect that if you were putting, that didn't really apply, what's to say it's the order of magnitude or anything. That's kind of a implied assumption by the person reporting the information. If you were to report that, that's probably something that would be reported in a footnote or some other manner. The extensible list is it's kind of not really a list per se. It's really more a set of items. There is no necessarily implied order, and the order of the items is meaningless. So if you've got a list of items in the extensible list, you should not imply anything from the order that they're in there. Like list is probably not the appropriate word, because a list kind of implies that there is an order and that you can have duplicates. They're really more like just a set of items. There's no duplicates, and there is no implied order, and the order is meaningless.
Okay, we have one more question. Actually, we're getting more questions. Since the content of an EEL will never look exactly like the text in an original HTML document, does this mean that every EEL fact must appear in IX hidden in an inline XBRL document?
I did see a couple of filings doing some research where some of the facts weren't necessarily hidden. I know there's an EFM rule about this. I almost wonder if the person posing the question may be able to provide some light into this. The second question on the country, the U.S., that's not United States, that's correct. But the the label, the reason why they went with the extensible enumerations is using elements is that it then provides for other XBRL constructs to be used, such as referencing and labeling, that you don't necessarily get with a fixed enumerated list of choices, where that only lists them out. We can actually provide domain member relationships to provide more information. You can provide labeling and you can provide references. So
yeah, and I think within the construct of an SEC filing, you would expect to see those in hidden. You wouldn't expect to see those QNAME or those element names sitting in the filing. Obviously, from an XBRL international specification perspective, those, if you were rendering data, which was an extensible list, you could render the label or different label types or whatever, depending on what the software that you were using to show it. So I think for SEC filings at this point, if they currently are, they're being put into the hidden component of the instance document. But as this gets rolled out, I would expect to see if maybe there'll be an additional guidance that comes out on how that should be handled.
Okay, well, I think we'll go on to our CPE questions because we have two CPE questions we have to cover. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, Campbell, if that's okay.
Yep.
So I just. I'm sorry, I just seem to have lost my console here. Hang on one second. Okay, I'm going to pull up the next poll. Okay, when were the extensible list elements first introduced to the US GAAP, excuse me, to the US GAAP taxonomy? 2019, 2018, or 2017? So just please, click on the most appropriate answer if you intend to get CPE credit. And we've got about another 30 seconds here. Just like about another 10 seconds. Okay, I'm going to close down the polling and bring up the last poll. Which of the following is not one of the 3 primary requirements for facts reported using extensible list elements? Element reported as a fact must exist in a schema. Element cannot be an extension, or element must be present in the domain member relationship defined in the US GAAP and SRT taxonomies. Which is not one of the 3 primary requirements. Okay, we've got another 30 seconds here. Okay, I'm going to close down the polling in just a couple seconds. Okay, great. Thank you very much. Yeah, I want to, I'm just going to pull up my slides again here because I just like to, talk about some upcoming programs that we have. But first, I'd like to thank our speakers today from the FASB, David Shaw and Louis Mathern. Thank you very much for giving us the presentation and responding to questions. I know Louis was kind of our silent partner here, but he did answer a lot of the questions that came in. And also Campbell Pride from XBRL US. And going forward, we have quite a few events coming up, actually. We have on April 22nd, we have another webinar that we want to invite everyone to attend. It's on data analytics to set policy, evaluate investments, and more. This event is co-sponsored by the CFA Institute, and we'll have speakers from the CFA Institute, from CalcBench and Idacity, talking about how structured data is being used and other ways that it can be used. Next, as we move into May, we've got really a 2-part webinar series on inline XBRL and cover page tagging. You know, we're very aware that we have phase 2 filers coming up, having to tag in inline XBRL and tagging their cover pages for the first time. So we have iXBRL and cover page tagging, get ready phase 2 filers on May 6th. And that one is going to feature Mike Willis from the SEC is going to be on that, as well as a number of our members, really going through, you know, what are the rules and what are some lessons learned in the first phase of filing. And then on May 13th, we have our second in that webinar series, cover page tagging for phase 2 filers. So the first one's going to focus a lot on inline XBRL and how to tag. And the second one is going to focus on using those skills as you tag your cover page. So we hope that everybody will attend those programs coming up over the next month and a half or so. And we will see you all at the next program. Okay, thanks very much.